Pride and Prejudice 2005 this, Pride and Prejudice 1995 that. But who's gonna talk about the Mormon classic, Pride and Prejudice, a Latter-day Comedy, 2003? I have 2 pages of my every thought while watching this iconic film, this masterpiece, if you will. So let me walk you through it. Is it good? No, not at all. Does it stick to being a faithful adaptation on any front? Also, no. How's the acting? Terrible. And it radiates, it oozes the most awkward secondhand embarrassment. But I think your life is not complete if you haven't seen this movie. This is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in my entire life. So let's... Pride and Prejudice 2003, a Latter-day Comedy, is a modern Mormon adaptation that features a friend group. Our main character is Lizzy Bennett, obviously. And instead of having the Bennett sisters, it's just like a group of 20-something-year-old friends who are like either exiting or still in college. I don't really know what's going on. But they all live together. Lydia is their friend, but also their landlord. And when we meet Jane, Lizzy introduces her as, "That's Jane, my Argentinian roommate." And at any point in the movie, if you ever forget that this is a Latina, then the Spanish music that plays every time we cut to her should remind you. But anyways, in this version, Lizzy is 26 years old. We are in Utah. And she's in college, but I think she's like pursuing like a master's degree or something. I'm assuming in English. Is any of this established properly? No. But we do know that Lizzy is an aspiring author who is querying her novel that Jane describes as a Napoleonic techno fantasy. And if I don't have this book in my hands, I will die. But you guys, you don't get it. You don't get it. This movie is comedy gold, both intentionally but also just like accidentally. There's a scene where Mary is being embarrassing because, of course, poor Mary in every iteration. But she embarrasses herself at the party, and there's this one heckler. We never see his face, but we can hear him because off in the distance we hear a man go, "You suck, and therefore this party sucks." And then Lydia becomes like a minor villain for 2 seconds. Mr. Collins is insane and like an aspiring youth pastor at their church. And there's this daydream sequence where Lizzy throws a Bible at his face and the whole church cheers. We know that Wickham's the bad guy because he doesn't go to church. And we know that Mr. Darcy and Lizzy Bennett are soulmates because Mr. Darcy is a misogynistic douche and Lizzy is the biggest pick-me on planet Earth. Side note, the actress playing Jane, I thought was just Lana Del Rey. But no, this movie is so funny. And honestly, okay, what I will give this movie like points for is that the actors playing Lizzy and Darcy do have really good chemistry for some reason. And we do hit like the major beats regarding their relationship. That's the only thing that's really faithful to the book. But what will always get me, this isn't even a spoiler, but I need this to be something you pay attention to when you watch it, because it's on Tubi. You will watch it. There is a scene at the end where the police are involved. I'm not going to explain why. The police are involved and there's an eyewitness that is not, we don't know his name, but he stole the show. I hope he's doing great things right now. And this eyewitness is talking to the police and you can hear him in the background while the main characters are talking. I don't give a fuck what Lizzy was saying. I don't even remember what she was saying, but I heard this man off in the distance ranting to the police saying, "Look at me. I have the hair of an innocent man. I'm a nice man, a righteous, gentle man." All of the actors, they're so like sleepy in this movie. Like everyone is so monotone and awkward and I never understand like why people are doing the things that they do. But no, this is genuine. I think this is one of the greatest movies of all time. Where is this background extras Oscar? Oh my god, I took a screenshot. Because the other thing that gets me, also not a major spoiler, I think some of the greatest moments in this film, in this visual art piece, are like the most random background details. Because there's this really funny scene where Lizzy is getting like a paper bag that's graded and it has a 100. Like it's an A+ essay. It's for her English class, and the essay is titled Great Female Characters in English Literature. And the opening line says, there are times in life when a person might find himself or herself having learned something that they wish they had never learned. And then she just gets handed a TA position. I think I love this movie. I think it's in my, like, if I had Letterboxd, it'd be in my top 4. I'm not gonna lie to you. I can no longer make the claim that Pride and Prejudice 2005 is my favorite Pride and Prejudice.
Do you ever wish you were not famous and can live an ordinary life? I'll be honest with you, no.
Oh no, the worst Pride and Prejudice is not the Mormon one. The worst Pride and Prejudice adaptation is the 2019 film Becoming Miss Bennett, Pride and Prejudice. Quite literally, the only thing that entire film has going for it is that the guy playing Mr. Darcy is attractive. And that is all. Becoming Miss Bennett, Pride and Prejudice 2019 is a small budget indie film about a vlogger who has just been casted in a new Pride and Prejudice film. She has no acting experience outside of this really popular web series that she did. Do we see any evidence of this web series? No. But she's pursuing her dreams to become an actress, and she gets casted as Lizzy Bennett in an upcoming production. She is also the only American being casted alongside an all-British cast. The major conflict in this film? She does not know how to do a decent British accent. And if she can't get one down within the 2 weeks it takes to prep for filming, she gets replaced. Part of what makes the story of Pride and Prejudice so compelling and so interesting and so timeless is the pride and the prejudice. Neither of those things are featured in this story. I also don't know why Kate, our main character, our Lizzy Bennett, has 8 million followers, as people keep mentioning in this film. They keep bringing up how she's like a really popular vlogger, and this is all she does, okay? She sits, sometimes walks in front of her phone, and goes on live, not recording videos and putting it to, she goes on live, and then she'll talk for like at minimum 30 seconds, at maximum 2 minutes, about her day and her feelings today, and like do a quick recap and then encourage her followers to follow their dreams, and then she signs out, and that is the extent of her content. 8 million followers on watchit.com. Anyways, the guy who's playing Mr. Darcy hates her because he's a professional, well-trained West End actor, and he's pissed. And here's my thing, okay? Here's my thing. The big scene in every Pride and Prejudice that Pride and Prejudice is, when Lizzy overhears Mr. Darcy talking shit, that's like always a major moment, because then she's gonna like bring it back and then he'll feel bad. And it's very embarrassing for Mr. Darcy. I was on this man's side. He was so right. Do you know what he does? This man who's just been cast as Mr. Darcy goes to like rant to the director and the like co-director? I don't know what that other lady does. But he's so right in everything that he's ranting about. He's so mad that this random nobody just got like casted with zero experience and also can't do an accent. And when he brings up how terrible her accent is, do you know what the director tells him? They don't have a budget to hire a dialect coach. So then he's like, she's watching YouTube videos and you and the rest of the cast will help her for free. That is not his responsibility. Also, having an accent does not make you the most qualified to teach someone else how to do that accent. Also, spoiler alert, because she nails the accent. No, she doesn't. If you're expecting to see any growth in that accent, you will not. And the whole film will gaslight you into thinking the answer is yes. The answer is no. As if I don't have ears. What? It's bad and it stays bad. And worst of all, it's not the movie isn't even bad in a way that's funny like the Mormon Pride and Prejudice. This movie is just bad. This movie, you want to know what my face looked like watching it? Just like that. That was it. It's not even reaching Hallmark movie quality. It's just an unpleasant experience. And on that note, I'm looking down on my list. I have multiple pages dedicated to all of the Pride and Prejudice adaptations. I will be getting to the multiple Hallmark movie Pride and Prejudice adaptations soon. Yeah, thank you. Oh, I watched Pride and Prejudice, a new musical, yesterday. That is a delightful production, okay? For anyone who doesn't know, Pride and Prejudice got turned into a stage production musical in like 2020, 2021. And there's an official like filmed film of it available on YouTube. I watched it on Tubi. And not only is it a strong direct adaptation, the music's whatever. Lady Catherine's intro song slaps. Everyone's a great singer, the music's fine. Here's why I love it though, okay? It's so unreasonably funny. The way this production works with like the pre-existing text from the book is so good. And the way that they alter it for the stage production is so good. Mary shines in this stage production. Because you know what they do with Mary? Anytime there's a set change and things are rearranged, Mary is the one to walk out on stage and announce to the audience where we are. And that's really like her main role for a good 80% of this production. Because Mary's not like a main character. Mary's barely in the book. But Mary shines in this musical. So it'll be like rearranging, and then Mary, straight face, walks out from the shadows. Pemberley leaves. It's so good. And it's so funny every time. I think she does it like 30 times in that whole show. Caroline also manages to be so funny. In every adaptation, Caroline is just like annoying and pisses me off. Because like, she's supposed to. She's annoying and she pisses you off. And she's definitely the same Caroline she always is. But in this production, the characters narrate their letters to each other. And Caroline is so bored of every conversation she's having. There's one major deviation from the source material that I think is like really interesting. I personally don't love it, but I wasn't mad at it either. The musical makes the decision to make it like abundantly clear to the audience the moment Darcy falls in love with Lizzy, and like he sings a couple of songs about how much he loves Lizzy and how much he's got a crush on her. So not only does he fall first and fall harder, but it's also established very, very early in the production that like, oh, he has a crush on her like right now. I personally love the brooding nature and like the difficult to read nature of Mr. Darcy. I love trying to exactly pinpoint what emotion is being felt when. I like that he's sort of like a wall, but this version of him is really, really funny. I laughed really hard in one scene. He's having an argument with Lizzy. It's like their first of many. They're getting in each other's face. They're raising voices at each other. They're throwing insults. Lizzy storms off. And Darcy goes, "Oh God, I like her eyes." And he breaks out into song. And I think it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. It's a delightful production, and I highly recommend it. I don't know if I would ever like rewatch it. It's no Shrek the Musical. It's not endlessly rewatchable. But if a production were to show up near me and I had time, I would buy a ticket. Pride and Prejudice, a new musical, is a good time. Let's talk about the 2004 Bollywood-inspired modern musical rom-com adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice. This is honestly one of the like strongest Pride and Prejudice adaptations I've seen so far. One of the strongest modern adaptations that I've seen so far. The way the story is able to directly adapt its themes within a modern setting is so good, and the music slaps. I don't care what anyone has to say about it. The music slaps. I had so much fun watching this movie, and it is very close to being one of the most perfect movies in the world. Half a star was deducted because I do not love the handling of racism, but especially internalized racism in this movie. It's acknowledged. It's not broken down enough, and I think a lot of the resolutions for certain characters are just sort of like a little too subtle for my liking regarding this topic. But Pride and Prejudice is so much fun. It's so vibrant. It's so colorful. It's so filled to the brim with life. And I have an attachment to this movie. I have an attachment to the everything of this movie. To everyone who comments on my other Pride and Prejudice videos asking if I've seen this one yet, I get it. Because I would also be commenting on everyone else's Pride and Prejudice videos asking if they've seen that one yet. You and me, we see each other. Jose, if this means you haven't seen the gay Pride and Prejudice movie, we need to fix that like yesterday. Let me tell you something about Fire Island 2022, the modern gay rom-com. Pride and Prejudice adaptation. I fucking love this movie. This is such a high energy adaptation that is also very faithful to the original source material. I need 5 more, 10 more gay rom-coms written and directed by Joel Kim Booster. Not only does this movie have a strong adaptation of the themes surrounding class from the original source material, but also adds onto it and includes discussions surrounding fat phobia, toxic masculinity, and racism as it operates within the gay community. Our main character, Noah, is our Lizzy Bennett, and I love him. And his friend group, this found family, is our Bennett sister group. For 1 week every single year, this group goes to a place called Fire Island, which is like a gay resort island getaway that also seems to double as like a retirement destination. But you have to be rich to own a house on this island. Which brings us to our Mrs. Bennett character, which is the older lesbian who has adopted this group and lets them stay with her every year. And this movie is so much fun. I appreciate this movie as an adaptation for 2 reasons. The first one being that every Bennett sister gets to shine. Usually, with such a large cast of characters, it's really easy for 1 or 2, usually Mary or Kitty, to fade into the background and be completely forgotten about. But this cast is filled with big, memorable personalities that you really can't help but notice. They're all very loud and distinct, and they're so fun. What was also interesting is the way it decides to deviate from the source material in merging the Charlotte character and the Jane character into one person that experiences both character arcs, which doesn't sound like it could work, but works flawlessly in this film. And I haven't even talked about the insane chemistry between Noah and the Mr. Darcy character, Will. There's one scene in particular where the two are like debating their opinions on a certain author's work. I gasped. Do you want to know how good the chemistry was? I immediately went to Google if either of those 2 men were in a relationship and in a relationship with each other, and was confused when the answer was no. Now, I do have beef with one thing in particular, and that's the handling of the Mr. Wickham storyline. Because here's the thing, and I don't care if this is a spoiler, I think it's an important thing to acknowledge. I don't love that it's unclear if the Mr. Wickham character sexually assaulted our Kitty character. We know that the Kitty character, Keegan, we know that he was not sober when he spent a night with the Wickham character. We don't know if the Wickham character was sober. And that felt like something important to establish in the greater conversation of what he does. Because the Wickham storyline in this movie also features a revenge porn plot, which was jarring, I'm not gonna lie. This is such a lighthearted, fun rom-com, and this conflict threw me off a little bit. But overall, Joel Kim Booster did something fantastic with this book. And it was so funny, it was so passionate, it was so tender. I will be watching again and again and again. Jose, get on this. 2 days ago, I watched the film Austenland 2013, and then today I watched it again because I made my mom watch it. So now let me tell you about one of the greatest movies of all time. Austenland 2013 is a modern rom-com that is not so much a Pride and Prejudice retelling, but more so a love letter to the world of Pride and Prejudice. Our main character is a woman in her 30s named Jane, who is obsessed with Pride and Prejudice and Mr. Darcy and has been since like childhood. Specifically, Colin Firth's Mr. Darcy, she has a cardboard cutout of him in her apartment. Jane has just made the decision to go to a Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice Regency era focused resort getaway in order to sort of get this obsession out of her system, maybe to fuel it a little bit. And so she goes to London to go LARP, being in a Jane Austen novel, and then Jennifer Coolidge is there. Jennifer Coolidge plays an American who doesn't know what Pride and Prejudice is, but is really there to have fun and put on the world's worst British accent. I love her so much. Austenland provides different customer package experiences, and Jane can only afford the cheapest option, which is the copper package, and everyone around her is like filthy rich, so they get like the premium package that lets them do whatever they want. Austenland also guarantees that every customer, regardless of like the pricing of their package, will be romanced by one of their Austenland actors. And chaos ensues shortly after Jane meets a very Mr. Darcy-esque man named Mr. Nobley. Does this really function as a Pride and Prejudice adaptation or retelling? No, not really. But the relationship between Jane and Nobley is very Pride and Prejudice inspired, and that's really it. That's all you need, actually. And then Jennifer Coolidge is there, yelling! Ironically, Jennifer Coolidge plays a character named Elizabeth and goes by Lizzy. The characters of Lizzy and the characters of Amelia really carried this production, okay? These are two batshit insane women causing chaos on every single turn, and I'm obsessed with them. I love the way that they bounce off of each other, and I love the way that they just destroy everything in their path. And then there's a great romance at its center. I had so much fun with this. This is such... I think about it. And I want to go to Austin Land. Let's discuss the 2019 modern Christian adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice Atlanta. The vibe of this, very Hallmark, very Jesus. What makes this absolutely necessary for you to watch? The mom from Sister Sister is Mrs. Bennett. The dad from Family Matters is Mr. Bennett. Hello? Yes! Yes! Look at me in my eyes right now and tell me that Jackie Harry isn't the most perfect Mrs. Bennett you've ever seen in your life. Regardless of if you've seen this movie. That's just Mrs. Bennett. And honestly, because of that casting alone, this movie will always be iconic. Is the rest of it good? It's there. It's not a strong movie or adaptation, but what it does get right is Lizzy Bennett. Lizzy in this movie is a community organizer and activist battling gentrification in her historic neighborhood. And this is very on brand. Where she starts to lose me a little bit is in her romance with like a politician who's friends with the gentrifier. I think one of the things that really weakens this movie is the way it attempts to soften the really important discussions, the really important uncomfortable discussions being had in the story of Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice has a little bit of teeth to it, and even though it ends happily, not everyone gets their happy fairy tale ending. In this movie, Charlotte not only is genuinely like in love with Mr. Collins, but the exploration of the Wickham conflict completely goes off the rails. They make Wickham a bum, rightfully so, but like a well-meaning bum who ultimately does genuinely care for Lydia. And that's just not Pride and Prejudice. The conversations surrounding predatory behavior and also sacrifice and settling can still be had and still need to be had hundreds of years after the world of Jane Austen, the world of Pride and Prejudice, has passed. And I think it's a really unfortunate choice to soften all the ugly parts of that book. Ultimately, though, this isn't the worst Pride and Prejudice adaptation I've seen by a long shot. But it's also not the best. I remain neutral on it existing. But I will not remain neutral on Jackie Harry. She's in my top 3 Mrs. Bennetts. I just finished watching the 1995 Pride and Prejudice BBC miniseries starring Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely. Who was gonna tell me that Jennifer Ely is American? I'm only used to being tricked by British actors playing Americans. I'm not adapted to things being the other way around. I am a new woman, and I will never be the same. Here's my beef with myself. Okay, because this was 5 10s across the board. This was a 5 out of 5 experience. It was everything. I've been watching the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie for years. I only read the book last month. I've been watching the 2005 movie for years. I knew that there was an undying, never-ending, ongoing debate about which is better, 2005, the 2005 movie, and the 1995 BBC miniseries, because people were like, oh, the 1995 miniseries is more faithful, but then people were like, no, but the vibes of 2005 are so much better. And I knew that this debate, and I, for some reason, maybe it was because I didn't want to like break my bond with the 2005 movie. So that's why I didn't get curious enough to watch the 1995 miniseries. I should have been more curious. Because it's not like my love for the 2005 film has gone anywhere. That will always remain. Me and 2005 go like this. And we're staying like this. But the 1995 miniseries with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ely. Unreal. Not only is it so faithful to the source material, but it goes beyond being accurate. It it expands on every detail. I feel like I know all of these characters so much more intimately than I did with the book. Our time in this world and with this family and with these people, it's extended further than what we already had. And Colin Firth. Listen, I was already in love with him. What I have for him now is just unhealthy. And Jennifer Ely in this, oh my God, she's so, she's just so, she's so, she's just so, She has these, she's so good with like the range of emotion for Lizzy Bennett. That is Lizzy Bennett. And in case anyone was wondering where I stand on the great debate, in this evil debate of pitting two queens against each other, I think the 1995 BBC miniseries is the objectively better adaptation in terms of faithfulness to the source material. It's perfect across the board, no notes, with one exception. The soundtrack is not touching the 2005 film. Which one I prefer? I'm still gonna go with 2005, but by this much, and that's only because I am a hopeless romantic, and I really enjoy them leaning away from the original source material in favor of more sappy romance, because that is just who I am. I know my heart. I know I am what I am. Like, sometimes when I go to my happy place, it's just Mr. Darcy's voice at the end of the movie whispering to Lizzy, Mrs. Darcy, Mrs. Darcy. Oh my God! And that stuttering he does with when he says, oh my God. Just the thought of it alone has too much power over me. But I adored the 1995 BBC miniseries. Like, I understand why, of all of the bajillion trillion adaptations, these are the two that people talk about when they're like, but which is better? Like, no one gives a fuck about any other adaptation but these two. And like, I get it, because I am there with you. Like, I'm right here. It took me so long, but I have arrived, and I see all of you, and I know you can see me because I'm panicked. And that's all this fandom is. Panic. I understand Jane from the movie Austenland on a spiritual level now, like in a way that I never have before, in her being like a grown woman in her 30s who still has a cardboard cutout of Colin Firth's Mr. Darcy. Like, me too. Yes, correct. Well, side note, but it is still on topic. I love how, like, there's no such thing as an adaptation that has an inaccurate Mr. Collins. He's just like every version of him is the exact same, and it works in every like, it doesn't matter if it's Mormon, if it's period accurate, if it's modern. He only exists in one way, and it's the same every single time, and it is always so funny. Like, Mr. Collins as a person just like transcends space and time. I can't deal with this. Okay. I have finally watched the Lizzy Bennett Diaries. Love you, but you can all stop asking me when I'm gonna watch it now. I binge watched this entire 100 episode web series across 2 days, and I have so many thoughts. For anyone who doesn't know, the Lizzy Bennett Diaries is a YouTube web series, modern adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, where Lizzy Bennett is a YouTuber / vlogger who does these 3 to 5 minute video diaries going over her day and her life and her sisters and drama between her and a guy named Darcy. And it's mainly told from inside of her room, sitting inside of an office, sitting at someone else's house. We're never seeing her in motion. It's always told in story time format, with some skits to fill in the blanks and give the audience visuals. And despite these limitations within the setting and with the storytime format and with the very small cast that we're working with, it manages to be one of the most faithful adaptations to the work I've seen yet. It hits every single beat in just an updated way. The series came out in 2012, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it shows. And I mean that in like the best and worst way. The best in like the absolute time capsule of the fashion and the makeup and the internet humor and references, in a bad way also having to do with that humor, because some of these jokes do not age well at all. But this web series really surprised me, because once I started, I physically I could not stop. And that's in spite of me having an aversion to anything related to like a content creator on social media setting up good lighting and a camera in focus to document themselves in distress, which is something that the series demands in order to move the plot forward. We don't get internal narration in this. We need these characters to say things out loud and do things on camera, knowing that there's a camera in front of them. But the current age of social media has icked me out so bad that I cringed for a lot of... I had to skim episode 87. I couldn't... I had to keep skipping through. I could not just leave that alone. I had to skip through it as quickly as possible. No. And I will not lie, I have a lot of beef with this version of Lizzy Bennett oversharing online and also refusing to anonymize anyone, calling people out by first and last name, and then being genuinely like panicked at the idea of any of these people seeing these published videos online. But no, the series was genuinely very addictive in spite of it freaking me out and making me anxious. With one thing that is so untouchable in this series for me, something I could never bring myself to critique, this adaptation has my favorite exploration and depiction of the Charlotte Lucas character. Charlotte shines in this adaptation. She is my favorite character from this entire project. I've always liked Charlotte, but I've always teetered on liking her and being neutral on her. In this version, she's my everything. I love the way that she consistently pushes back on Lizzy's prejudices and her biases. I love that she is very firm on setting boundaries, that she stands her ground, that she has all of this personality to her. Charlotte Lou is phenomenal. I love Charlotte. And honestly, the casting for this across the board was really strong. I wish I didn't have to go to Lydia's vlog channel in order to get more of Mary, because I do think it's genuinely very criminal that out of the 100 episodes, we only get Mary like once, maybe twice. And I love what this web series world did with Mary. They made her the girl's cousin and not a sister, and we also get a total like removal of Kitty as a character. But the life that these actors breathe into these characters in this modern setting, in this modern like YouTube environment, was so deeply interesting. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the cringe and secondhand embarrassment is what's gonna stop me from ever rewatching this project. I also think that if I had watched this when it was coming out, I would also be more in love with it because I would have nostalgia attached to it. But because I don't have that nostalgia, I don't really have as strong of a connection to the work as I think the majority of the fans do. But this is undeniably like one of the most clever explorations and adaptations from this book I've seen so far. And I think it's going to be really difficult to top the level of like creativity that was just like infused into this project. Forget everything I said about Becoming Miss Bennett, Pride and Prejudice 2019 being the worst Pride and Prejudice adaptation. That now belongs to Christmas at Pemberley Manor, the 2018 modern Hallmark Christmas retelling. That's literally not even Pride and Prejudice. This isn't even me being like a picky fangirl. I'm telling you, whoever was in charge of this project over at Hallmark headquarters took a random generic script and was like, you know what we should do? We should tap into the Jane Austen market and just say that this is Pride and Prejudice. And then one of the writers was probably like, gee, boss, do you mean that we got to do some changes? And the boss was like, no, silly. Just take some of the names from some of the characters in Pride and Prejudice and give it to some of the characters in this movie. Now it's Pride and Prejudice. Really, look at this. Look at this. It's inverted, but I do not care. That's the section of how it rates out of 5 stars for how it functions as an adaptation or retelling. That is a half single star. The only reason I even rank it that high is because they got the evil stepmom from The Parent Trap to be Caroline. That's the only good thing this offers. She pulled up at the scene and they were like, hey, Caroline. And I was like, yeah. Everything else is ass. Let's talk about it. Elizabeth Bennett, who at no point even goes by Lizzy in this production, is an assistant, subordinate to Catherine at a company that does like events, but like big ones for rich people, question mark. It is also really important that you know that it's Christmas time and Elizabeth Bennett fucking loves Christmas. Mr. Darcy is like the head of Darcy Worldwide. That's literally what his company is named. I laughed. And he hasn't celebrated Christmas in years. He hasn't celebrated Christmas since he was a child. But he doesn't hate Christmas. He just doesn't have time for it because he's always working. His uncle recently passed away, leaving him a big, gigantic estate in this small town where Elizabeth Bennett is going to help out her mayor friend that she met in college, who is in love with her, to plan a giant town Christmas festival. This is where we meet the mayor, George. No last name. I literally went to Google it to see if this was supposed to be Wickham. The cast he's just George. At no point do we ever get his last. That's just George. And maybe it's for the best that he's not established to be Wickham, like canonically, because that's not Mr. Wickham. There is no Mr. Wickham. Now, George has a personal assistant named Jane Lucas, who's super organized, and that is her only personality trait. She's Jane, and she's really organized. Darcy has a new personal assistant that just started. It's like his first day, and he's very, very nervous. His name is Travis, but he's supposed to be our Bingley character because him and Jane have a romance. There's a whole thing about how they're opposites attracting because Jane is organized and Travis is not. This is where their personalities begin and end. Anyways, there's issues about like the location for the Christmas festival, and they need a location in like 3 days. And so they're like, wait, Jane is like, I saw a great estate on the way here. We should talk to the owner. And then George is like, that might be a problem because the owner is Darcy and he's planning on selling that estate to be torn down to make way for new luxury condos. But even then, that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue with Lizzy going to talk to Darcy about this is because they had a minor conflict 2 seconds prior to her being like, wait, I saw this great place. And if you're wondering if that conflict follows the book in any way, shape, or form, the answer is no. William Darcy in this adaptation is the most chill guy who just like tells jokes, but because they don't land, people don't like him. But he's very charming and nice and just like normal. Anyways, he made one joke to his new assistant Travis being like, give me a cup of coffee, and if you don't, you're fired. And it was a joke. He was joking. Travis didn't realize that was a joke because he's nervous. So then he goes to cut the line to get coffee where Elizabeth and George and Jane are at. And Elizabeth is like, there's a line. And Travis is like, I'm so sorry, like my boss will fire me if I don't get this coffee. And she was like, where is he? Let me go talk to him. So she goes to scold Mr. Darcy, and Mr. Darcy looks at her and is like, it was a joke. And then Elizabeth is like, well, clearly Travis didn't get it. And that's it. That's the big conflict, which everyone gets over in like 2 seconds. Anyways, the estate is called Pemberley Manor. Because this is Pride and Prejudice, allegedly. It's not! And because of reasons, Darcy does not allow for the festival to take place there, but then he does. Oh my god! Oh my god. I almost forgot. So Pemberley has a groundskeeper, has a caretaker, because no one lives there, right? I want you to guess. Who takes care of the house and spreads Santa Claus? Santa Claus? Santa Claus. And it's not even like a guy that's Santa Claus low key. That's the literal Santa Claus undercover, but very obvious about it. Also, Elizabeth does this thing where she'll sing out loud to herself, but always in front of other people. And there's more than one moment in this movie where someone's like, wow, you're really good. And she's like, oh my god, stop. I don't even like really sing anymore. And then this leads to her being the only person in this entire town who can sing anything. And she has to give a concert. She sings Silent Night. The one Silent Night, singular, that one song, and calls it a day. The singing scene takes up exactly 1 minute and 45 seconds. I kept track. My thoughts on how this functions as a Pride and Prejudice retelling adaptation, it doesn't. My thoughts on how it functions as a standard generic Hallmark Christmas movie, it's a generic, it's regular. This feels so disrespectful to me personally. I'm not gonna lie to you. Excuse the voice, I have strep throat. Whoa. But I'm continuing my journey down Pride and Prejudice adaptations. I'm currently moving through the Hallmark section of this journey, and I have just started Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe, the gender-bent Christmas modern Hallmark Pride and Prejudice adaptation. Darcy Fitzwilliam and Luke Bennett are former academic rivals from Pemberley High. What makes this modern adaptation of Pride and Prejudice revolutionary amongst its peers is that usually in the modern take, no one can decide who should be more annoying, Lizzy or Darcy, because no one is ever capable of finding true balance between these characters, but somehow, some way, through the power of Christmas magic, they both piss me off. This is also my second experience watching a Hallmark adaptation where the creators involved think all Pride and Prejudice is when the Lizzy Bennett character and the Darcy character argue for a little bit at some point in time and get over it in 2 seconds, and somewhere in the movie there's a location named Pemberley. These people are literally friends. They're friends. We don't even get a Bennett family or Jane and Bingley figures. I think everyone involved should go to prison.
What?
No, you did not.
What? I don't know what you're talking about.
I can feel the illness in me multiplying, growing stronger to take me out. This movie isn't even good by Hallmark standards. Like, it's multifaceted in just how terrible it is. Where's the pride? Who's prejudiced? This is just Christmas. I'm all done now. I give it half of 1 star for how it functions as an adaptation. 1 star as a movie on its own. So I just finished Lost in Austin quite literally 30 seconds ago, and I have every thought that a brain could think. For anyone who doesn't know, Lost in Austin is a 2008 4-episode miniseries about a woman who is obsessed with Pride and Prejudice and accidentally finds a magic door that allows her and Lizzy Bennett to physically swap places. So then she enters the book and the world of Pride and Prejudice, and Lizzy Bennett just is left in the modern world in London. And then the door stays stuck closed, so both women are sort of like trapped in their new spaces. And at first, this concept is like kind of chaotic in a fun way, right? Because Pride and Prejudice is like #1 fan, just enter this world and they get to be in Pride and Prejudice, they meet the family, whatever. This very quickly becomes the most stressful show I think I've ever watched in my life. I can't rewatch this ever. I physically cannot bring myself to rewatch this. The way that this woman Amanda immediately destroys everything in her path on accident, but still. Like, does it have some funny moments? Yes. She introduces Lydia to lip gloss, which is so true of her. But this show causes me physical pain. Okay? And this isn't even like me being like, it's not Pride and Prejudice. The pain that Amanda accidentally but still causes to Bingley and Jane was so devastating to experience. I will also forever and always harbor resentment for everyone involved in the decision to give Wickham a redemption arc, because no. However, the character change that they did with Caroline, I can't bring myself to be mad at. This show did something that I wasn't expecting them to do with Caroline, and I screamed a little bit, I will not lie to you. But 80% of my time watching the show, I was stressed out and pissed and anxious. Because every time something goes wrong, something else goes wronger. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, this is only 4 episodes. This is only 4 episodes. There's no way this gets fixed by the finale. And like, somehow it kind of does. I still think that the ending of it all is a bit abrupt. And look, I'm not gonna lie to you. I did swoon a little bit because this show is not good for fueling my delusion that if I were magically in these circumstances of meeting the real Mr. Darcy, that he could very easily fall in love with me. Because that's what accidentally happens. Like, because Amanda has taken Lizzie's place, she goes through Lizzie's arc with Darcy. And there's a line, okay, where Amanda's like, no, this can't happen. You're supposed to be in love with Lizzie. Like, the world will hate me if I do this. And Darcy is like, then I'll fight the world. I gasped. Look, I'm gonna reenact it for you, okay? Watching. That's that's how I went. Also, River's song is Mrs. Bennett. That slayed. She's a great Mrs. Bennett. Okay? I just love her. Ultimately, I'm torn on this show. Because I understand why everyone was like, have you watched this yet? Because, like, I kind of love it, kind of hate it, to be quite honest. Like, I could not tear my eyes away from it. And it has some genuinely, like, great moments, some really funny moments. And this is quite literally a TV show exploration of literal self-insert fanfiction. But again, like, the destruction that this causes to the entire storyline, but more importantly, to these characters' lives. Like Jane... Oh my god, Jane. Jane is so miserable in these 4 episodes. Jane's going through it. And I am really sad that we don't really, like, get to see much of Lizzy. Like, we see her at the very beginning when they swap places, and then we see her at the very end and the influence that this modern world has had on her. But she's barely in this show. And I get it, I understand why, but, like, I think that this actress did a really good job with the very limited screen time that she had to be Lizzy Bennett. I also think that Darcy is really well cast. I liked Darcy in this adaptation. I don't love a certain joke that they make when Darcy sees a black person in the final episode. That was uncomfortable and I did not laugh. Like, I know it's probably period accurate. I know, but I still don't want to see it. All in all, I don't regret seeing it. I'm glad I watched it. I will never watch this again.
Some of us, I don't want to name names, make pretty bad throat noises when they drink. And it makes me think that the throat is
me?
No.
Is it me?
It's not Travis.
Let's talk about Unleashing Mr. Darcy, the 2016 modern Hallmark retelling where Lizzy Bennett plays a dog show trainer and Mr. Darcy is a really strict, really stern dog show judge. My sincerest apologies to the 12 people following my letterboxd where I am only logging the Pride and Prejudice adaptations I've been watching. Now, out of the 3 Hallmark modern Pride and Prejudice adaptations that I've seen, Unleashing Mr. Darcy is the strongest out of this trifecta. Like, this is the only one that has a sort of vague skeleton reference of Pride and Prejudice, which isn't saying much because the bar is in hell. However, whatever positive thing I have to say about what it does do right as an adaptation immediately gets revoked in the naming of these characters. What do we gain from Lizzy Bennett being turned to Lizzie Scott? That's Lizzy Bennett. And why would you piss me off? Okay, we have a Bingley character. His name is Henry, I think, where he is Donovan Darcy's best friend. And Lizzie's sister, I don't think she's named Jane. I think is she named Jenny in this? The Jane character, Lizzie's sister, does have that romance with him. Is there a conflict between them? No. This is only Pride and Prejudice if you squint. But she's the Lizzie sister and the Darcy best friend, they have their romance, right? The Darcy best friend is not named Bingley in any way. Tell me why. There's a separate scene where Darcy is training a new guy to be like a dog show judge. Like, that's his trainee. And he introduces his trainee to Lizzie and be like, this is Mr. Bingley. What the fuck is wrong with you? This actual guy named Bingley never even meets the Jane character. Why would you do that? I don't know who made that decision, but it makes me feel very violent. However, what this adaptation does that the other Hallmark ones don't is have at least like introductions to serious discussions about class differences, and privilege. They're very surface level though and incredibly brief. Anyways, in Unleashing Mr. Darcy, Lizzie's day job, like her bread and butter, because she's not a full-time dog show trainer, her bread and butter is like her other life passion, which is being a high school history teacher. She works at this really fancy private school with like rich children, and there's an issue at the very beginning of the movie where one of her students is failing. He's on a sports team, I don't remember which one, but he's failing because he just like doesn't do the work. He's really lazy. And so she's talking to him, she's like, if you don't pass this class, like if you fail, like you can't play your sport, which is a standard for like all schools everywhere, I think. Anyways, the kid is like, yeah, sure, whatever. And the kid's dad shows up, and he like works on Wall Street, but his wife is on like the board of directors for the school or the school district, and they both have a lot of money. And the dad shows up and he's like, I don't appreciate how you're threatening my son. And the teacher's like, I didn't threaten him. Like, this is a school policy. And the dad is like, oh, I know you types. You always have a price. And he pulls out like a wad of cash. And she's like, you can't buy a passing grade for your kid. So he's like, oh, okay. And then complains about her to the dean or like the principal or whatever. And the person in charge of the school puts Lizzy on leave. And so she's like, not out of a job, but basically out of a job right now temporarily. And is really pissed about it, which like rightfully so, like that sucked. But during this time, she's shifting focus to her other love, which is entering her dog into dog show competitions, which is where she meets a particular new judge in town, Donovan Darcy. And it's so funny. I think of all the Hallmark adaptations, this also does the best, most accurate sort of vibe for when Lizzy and Darcy meet and they had that initial like clashing. Because when Darcy comes up to her to like judge her dog or whatever, she's trying to be really personable and like chit chat with him and be like polite, and he's just like, do this, do that, now walk. And he's like super, you know, and it rubs Lizzy the wrong way, and she's like really annoyed about it. Anyways, they keep running into each other and she's pissed about it. Now, something the movie does that I do think is like kind of interesting is that it has two women in Lizzy's life performing the like combined role of Mrs. Bennett. So we have Lizzy's mom, who has a wedding dress shop and is really obsessed with like her daughters getting married, right? Lizzy just seems to have the one sister, Jane/Jenny ? And she has a really big personality and she's kind of embarrassing out in public. But the main woman we see fill the Mrs. Bennett role is that mother's best friend, who is basically Lizzy's aunt. Not by blood, but like that's her aunt. And so this aunt is like, oh my gosh, like you're not working right now. I could use a trainer for my dog, because of course this lady also enters her dog into dog show competitions. And so Lizzy flies out to New York to stay with her aunt and train her dog, who lives right across the street, Donovan Darcy. So he's her new temporary neighbor. There are a couple conversations where Lizzy lashes out at him, talking about like how he doesn't know what it's like to struggle, how he's just like all the other privileged people that she's had to work with. And right when you think these conversations are gonna go somewhere, it completely shuts down and we move on. There is a Catherine character and there is a Caroline character. They're very snooty and they play their roles well. The performances for Henry, who plays the legitimate Bingley character, and the older sister, the Jane character, are super underwhelming. They might as well not even exist in this movie, but all of the dogs involved in this production are very cute. All in all, as an adaptation, I give it a 1.5 star out of 5, but a very weak half star at that. And as a movie, it's just a 1, because this whole movie is just sort of like messy and all over the place and annoying, but I can see the effort to actually attempt to make this Pride and Prejudice. I don't think any of the Hallmark adaptations are worth watching, but if you do want to watch this one, they just uploaded it for free on YouTube. Like, it's on one of their official Hallmark movie channels. So there's that. I think I just watched a Hallmark Pride and Prejudice movie that's actually good. When I tell you, I was shocked, flabbergasted even. An American in Austin is a movie that came out this year. about an American librarian named Harriet who loves Pride and Prejudice and accidentally wakes up one day in the world of Pride and Prejudice. Only it's slightly different from Lost in Austin 2008 in that she doesn't replace Lizzy or swap places with anyone. She arrives onto the scene and everyone's like, oh my god, cousin Harriet from America? And for the longest time she thinks it's all an elaborate bit, and she thinks that these are just like really great actors and that this is like a really good, well thought out present. But no, she's in Pride and Prejudice. And here's the thing, the actress playing Harriet is genuinely very good. She's so charming and her comedic timing is fantastic. She does the heavy lifting for the overall quality of this production. What's spooky about this is that the actress's name, the actress playing Harriet, her name is Eliza Bennett. That's perfect in a way that just feels suspicious. Anyway, she's stumbling through the story and accidentally makes Mr. Darcy fall in love with her instead of Lizzy, which is important to note because she's been in love with Mr. Darcy since she was like a kid, basically. Like she's a Mr. Darcy girl. And prior to her waking up in Pride and Prejudice, she had just been proposed to by a longtime boyfriend who she loves. But then she panicked and said maybe to his public proposal. And then in a state of panic when she left, made a wish on a shooting star saying that I think that she could be with Mr. Darcy because that is like her standard of man. But no, Mr. Darcy falls head over heels in love with her immediately. And it's actually kind of funny. Like, do I think this guy's like a good Mr. Darcy? No, I think he's fine. But I do think this more comedic, more ridiculous approach to Mr. Darcy makes the movie a lot more fun. So Harriet's freaking out because at some point it does click what the situation is. So she's running around Pride and Prejudice trying to correct everything her presence there has completely thrown off, and then also trying to figure out how she's supposed to get home because she doesn't exactly know the logistics surrounding how she got there in the first place. Anyways, at one point she tells Lizzy and Jane that she's psychic. I don't know how period accurate this movie is. A lot of the fashion, the hairstyles don't look it, but I'm also not a stickler for that. I feel like if you are, though, this might not be as enjoyable as I thought it was. What I found most interesting about this Hallmark movie is that it doesn't really feel like a Hallmark movie in a lot of its humor. There's a scene that establishes Harriet to, I think, be an atheist, which isn't something I really expected from this channel, from this production company situation. I don't know just how Christian Hallmark is. I know that they tend to lean very conservatively, but they have been recently making some changes where like they have gay Hallmark movies now. But no, there's a scene where Harriet's trying to like, it's her last ditch effort to figure out how to get home. So she prays to God, but in her prayer she's like, never done this before, don't know if you know me, and it's kind of funny. Similar to Lost in Austin in the end of this though, she does manage to fix everything, but like simply in a new way. Like all of the characters have slightly altered endings, but ultimately they're like back with the people they should be with, back where they need to be. And Harriet is like okay in the end. Not only does this manage to be a pretty solid Pride and Prejudice movie in general, but I also think this is one of the best Hallmark movies I've seen ever. I have the authority to say that. Every year in December, my mom and my sister and I watch like nothing but Hallmark movies for like days on end. I know what the standard of quality for them is. This is like in their top 3. Now, is it still cheesy and very corny? Yes, it is. It is still Hallmark at the end of the day. But I think if you like the concept of Lost in Austin, but you're looking for something infinitely less anxiety-inducing, then this is the way to go. I think this is the only Hallmark Pride and Prejudice anything that I would ever actively recommend to people. Okay, I have referred to my list. Disclaimer for anyone watching. I have not seen every Pride and Prejudice adaptation yet, but I'm working on it. I'm gonna give you a first, second, and third place ranking because I refuse to only acknowledge one good Lydia. Because unpopular opinion, I've always loved Lydia. I think hands down the number 1 spot goes to the Lydia in the 1995 BBC miniseries. And I think part of that has to do with the media format and it being a show instead of a movie, so we're able to spend a lot more time with these characters. So we're able to see Lydia's lightheartedness, her humor, her mischievous nature. I also think the actress does a really great job with her, with being so loud and oblivious. And I think this Lydia does have like a lot of charm to her. A very close second goes to the 2005 film Lydia, because although she doesn't have sort of like the charm and the humor that I'm looking for in Lydia, she does have a lot more arrogance than the 1995 version has, in a way that's very annoying and very frustrating, that I think is perfect for the role. That's a really strong Lydia in terms of like the overall vibe of the most annoying little sister in the world who thinks she knows everything, and I can't help but love it. She just doesn't feel as fun to watch as 1995 though. Third place goes to the version of Lydia that's in Pride and Prejudice 2004, the Bollywood-inspired movie musical. In that version, she's named Lucky, and I really like that Lydia. I feel like we catch glimpses of what I love most about the 1995 and 2000 versions of Lydia in her. And I think that actress plays the role of a teenager way too eager to grow up really, really well. There's just something about 1995 that's a little bit too good though. Hello, this is me before watching the 1940 film adaptation for Pride and Prejudice starring Laurence Olivier. A film I'm very curious to see because in the trailer, it has the very misleading promotion of being a story about 5 love-hungry sisters and how they got their husbands! Exclamation point, as well as making one of the funniest decisions a trailer could make in showing us the Mr. Darcy proposal to Lizzy in the trailer, and then leaving us on a cliffhanger about what she will say. And then there's text on the screen that says, "What did she say to him? Yes? No? Perhaps?" I can't really bring myself to want to watch anything but this. I am a very big fan of them telling us in the opening credits where everyone lives. Big ups to that one-star review that says that the book is just people going to people's houses. It's tomorrow now. I watched all of it. And you know, I really thought after seeing the trailer and its advertisement that this is about 5 love-hungry sisters and how they got their husbands, that there would be some sort of shift to show all 5 Bennett daughters getting romances. But even that's not true. However, this does deviate a lot from the source material. It doesn't really feel like Pride and Prejudice. It more so feels just like Lizzy and Darcy and no one else. This movie just like completely cuts out the Bennett sisters altogether. If you're not a Bennett daughter who is Elizabeth, you don't get screen time. The resolution between Bingley and Jane is maybe 30 seconds, and it's Lizzy and Darcy looking at them from the distance and going, "Oh, that's nice, everything's better now," before we go back to them. At some point, Kitty and Lydia are just like never to be seen on screen again, including during the Wickham plot point, which like isn't even a major plot point. It barely gets any mentioned, and people are stressed about it for like 2 seconds. And then Darcy shows up and is like, "Oh, it was resolved." And then Lizzie's like, "Oh, that's good." And they don't even bother giving any details about it. Kitty is not in the end. I don't know where Kitty went. But it's implied that Mary has a love interest because there's a really socially awkward guy who'll play music with her and then they smile at each other. So even if we're talking about these changes that do give more romances to the sisters, Kitty's not included because Kitty just sort of like disappears into the ether at one point and then no one talks about her anymore. Also, for some reason, the filmmakers decided to make Lady Catherine Lizzie's #1 fan, which I think it has to be the strangest characterization I've ever seen for Lady Catherine. This is very romance heavy in a way that's fine, but Greer Garson and Laurence Olivier are doing the heavy lifting on why that focus is fine. Greer Garson is so unreasonably charming and witty and so fascinating to watch on screen. She is a strong protagonist, and watching her bounce off of every character is really fun. Laurence Olivier is one of the sassiest Mr. Darcys I've ever seen. Not just in his tone and overall delivery, but also in his body language, and I cannot physically bring myself to hate it. I also really enjoy Laurence Olivier's performance in that you can see the moment he has really fallen in love with Lizzy based solely on how he looked like in his eyes. Olivier does something with his eyes where there's like a shift, and it was really good. The way he looks at Greer Garson is just phenomenal, and I think that's where a lot of the heavy lifting for this movie comes in. Also, the costumes, they don't look Regency era accurate at all, especially like the dresses. They are, however, stunning. I can't think of a single dress on screen that wasn't gorgeous, especially if we're talking about Lizzy and Jane's costumes. Overall, I think it's much better as a movie than it is as an adaptation, but I do think also the first half of this movie is more faithful to the source material rather than the second half. At one point, we really do just like fly off the rails, and this stops being Pride and Prejudice and is just focusing on Lizzy and Darcy being in love. Is it my favorite Pride and Prejudice? Not while the Mormon one is still in circulation, but I do recommend everyone watch it once. The Vampire's Darcy is Pride and Prejudice, but if it were the Vampire Diaries, but instead of the Salvatore brothers, both brothers, in this case, are twin Darcy brothers, one Fitzwilliam and the other Fitzroy. In Vampire Diaries terms, our OG Fitzwilliam would be the Stephen in this situation because he's a lot more stoic and kind of boring, and Fitzroy would be Damon because he's the infinitely sluttier, sassier brother. And our Elena Gilbert is Lizzy Bennett. It's supposed to be book one in a series of adventures between Lizzy and the Darcy twin brothers, but it hasn't been updated since 2022, and I'm a little bit stressed about it because I am invested. Because here's the thing, it's not bad at all. Does this author choose to lean into the douchebaggery of the original Fitzwilliam Darcy by adding, like, extra layers of misogyny? Yes, absolutely. But he has his moments, and Fitzroy is undeniably charming. I'm sorry. But here's the plot. Going back to our original Regency era setting of Pride and Prejudice, vampires are sort of an open secret. Okay, so like everyone kind of knows that they're real, but very few people have seen one in real life and everyone's really scared about it, but there still are vampire deniers that swear up and down that it's just a bunch of tall tales and stories. Lizzy Bennett, in this case, has met a real vampire who decided to sort of befriend her, and it's unclear who this vampire is, but we do know that there is also a secret society of vampire hunters that Lizzy Bennett is now affiliated with, but refuses to fully join because she doesn't believe in murder on either side. She is also just genuinely very curious about vampires and wants to study them rather than just like completely eradicate them. The story opens up per usual with everyone talking about going to the assembly and also Mr. Bingley moving into town and bringing along the Darcy brothers, who Lizzy is very nervous about because, according to her, the last time the Darcys were in town, women died. It is also established that the Darcys, specifically the Darcy twins, are like known to be vampires, there's just no proof. But they've been around for a really long time. So when we get to this big party, this big ball where everyone meets, Lizzy already knows that these two are vampires and gets confirmation in like their overall appearance because they're just too beautiful to be human. Side note, there's a Twilight reference in this book, and yes, they are making fun of vampires sparkling. The main plot and conflict in this story isn't just like the typical one from Pride and Prejudice where like the Darcys are very frustrating, very annoying, very prideful, very prejudiced, but also there are vampire attacks and murders going on in this town shortly after the Darcys have arrived, and Lizzy wants to investigate. And then she confronts the Darcys, and they help her with this investigation because they didn't do it. It's only 101 pages, and I had a lot of fun with this, and I would like to see book 2. From where we're at right now, I think it's setting up for the relationship with Fitzwilliam to be the slower, slow burn approach out of her relationship with these two brothers, but it is unclear if the end game, if the end goal is for her to remain with the both of them at the same time, or if she has to choose one. Because there is a very brief conversation between the brothers where they discuss how like this wouldn't be the first time they shared, which is very strange to me. I'm all for a throuple. Thruples involving siblings are weird. I really do hope that this book gets developed further into its series so that we get more information on how the rest of the story of Pride and Prejudice would be adapted and developed and affected by this vampire plotline, because we have met Mr. Wickham and he does have some hostility towards the Darcys, but we don't really know where that's coming from, if it's only because of the vampire thing, like what he knows, what his connection is, what his ultimate betrayal that he's gonna hide is going to be. I'm also not sure how Lady Catherine would come into this, if she's a vampiress. Who else is in this secret society of vampire hunters? How we will see any development, if any, between Wickham and Lydia as that plot point and how it's affected by the presence of vampires. I have many questions and would like updates soon. Fitzwilliam Darcy, Werewolf Hunter, books 1 and 2 are 2 super duper short novellas that combined don't even reach 100 pages. Where in the world of Pride and Prejudice, there are werewolves running amok, and Fitzwilliam Darcy is a werewolf hunter. So it's the original world of Pride and Prejudice, but if werewolves completely derailed the plot. Interestingly enough, we open up on book 1, not really in the traditional way that we usually begin, but instead at Charlotte Lucas's birthday party. And this birthday party essentially replaces the original ball that everyone meets Bingley and Mr. Darcy and Caroline at. This party also gets interrupted by a young man who has just been mauled by a wolf in the area. Something these introductory paragraphs to the overall story do that I think is really interesting is make Darcy much more bold in this characterization of him, which I do hate, but also opt to give us a multi-perspective story. We're not just reading from Lizzie's point of view, we're also reading from Bingley and Darcy's point of view. Also interesting is that this doesn't really feel like Pride and Prejudice, but all of the characters still maintain their original Pride and Prejudice vibe, with the exception of Mr. Darcy. He's douchey in this story in a way that feels very egregious and is super not fun, and is incredibly bold in making moves on Lizzy right out the gate. Our characters have yet to really piece together the concept of werewolves and are instead just like leaning into the fact that there's a random pack of wolves that are in the area that really shouldn't be there. And shortly before book 2 ends, leaving us on a 4-year-long cliffhanger with no updates since, a young woman has just been murdered. All we really know is that Darcy and Bingley kind of are investigating, but it's unclear how much they know about the paranormal aspect of this story. And where this story loses me in the development of the relationship between Darcy and Lizzy, and also in the characterization of Darcy, it brings me back with the really intense action sequences and all the blood and the death and like the darkness of it. I'm pretty sure Mr. Wickham is being set up to be part of this werewolf pack, which I do think would be really interesting. But again, this series has not been updated since 2020. And I'm losing my mind a little bit. Pride and Premeditation is a Pride and Prejudice retelling that takes place in the original setting of Pride and Prejudice, but if Mr. Bennett was a lawyer and Lizzy was an aspiring lawyer and Darcy was also a lawyer and Mr. Bingley has been framed for murder. Here's the thing though. Is it a super cute and fun Regency-era murder mystery with twists and turns that you can unfortunately spot from a million miles away? Yes. Is it Pride and Prejudice, though? If you squint, then yeah. I'm not even going to talk about all of the historical inaccuracies because, one, I'm not really a stickler for it, and two, I'm not an expert. Now, there were quite a few inaccuracies that even I could spot, so I can't imagine what someone who, actually cares about the Regency era was thinking. But that isn't even relevant to what I have to say about this as a Pride and Prejudice adaptation. I think the author would have been better off with having this just be a Regency era murder mystery that acknowledges that it was inspired by Pride and Prejudice for the romance alone, because it really does just scrap so much. There is no Jane and Bingley in this. I don't even think that they meet, really. The original Mr. Wickham plot between him and Lydia is completely scrapped, although the two do meet once and you think they're about to get into it, and then that is also scrapped for an alternative Wickham conflict. The change for Lady Catherine de Bourgh and her role in this story is an interesting and pretty compelling one, although it's not so much fun anymore when we barely see her. Charlotte Lucas and her relationship to Mr. Collins is also completely scrapped for something new. You get hints of it beginning and then it just gets completely derailed. Charlotte Lucas is also made to be a biracial woman and a woman of color within this Regency era England setting, and there is one mention to how this impacts her role within society in a single conversation in an alternate version of that conversation and falling out that she has with Lizzy, where she's talking about how she can't afford to have the same opportunities when it comes to marriage and choosing her place in society that Lizzy can. And it's interesting and you think it's going to go somewhere, but then it's only mentioned for that single sentence in that single conversation at the beginning of the book and then never brought up again. And it has me questioning why the author even bothered in the first place. What does it do for the story to make Charlotte Lucas a woman of color and to begin commentary and then to just never follow through with it ever again? The book also chooses to deviate from the original's focus on class in favor of sticking strictly to this baby's first feminism approach to focusing on gender roles and how strict they are. And a lot of the barely there conversations surrounding women in the society are surface level at best. The vibe of this book overall is very Enola Holmes, and I do like the incorporation of pirates. That was very out of left field in a way that was funky and fresh, I will not lie. I'm left leaving this book very firmly as a 3-star read, because while it is super underwhelming and not even a Pride and Prejudice adaptation in my opinion, it is just a super easy to read, super fast-paced murder mystery in an environment that I'm not used to reading about often. And while a lot of the book is like pretty much okay at best, I do like this version of Lizzy Bennett. She does still feel like Lizzy Bennett, but if Lizzy Bennett just really, really wanted to be the first woman lawyer. All in all, I do think that I will get to the rest of this series because this is a series. This author has done like murder mystery twists to all of Jane Austen's works. So I think once I do continue my journey of Jane Austen, that I'll also continue on the journey of other Jane Austen retellings. Super cute, lots of murder, very interesting. Not really Pride and Prejudice. This is like the book version, but like a good book version of all of those Hallmark Pride and Prejudice adaptations that I have beef with. We need to talk about what my brain has been doing for the past 24 hours. So for the past few weeks, I've been in Pride and Prejudice, which you know. And I've been going through anything and everything that has to do with Pride and Prejudice. Books, movies, TV shows, anything. Yesterday, I found out Evan Bode exists. Evan Bode being someone who makes these digital collages with the Shuffle app, but across like numerous topics and fandoms, but always including the Muppets. So I saw that because it's hundreds of collages. So I was like, I need to do this. I want to do this so bad. I just want to do this all the time now. So I made one for Angels Before Men. But this isn't even what I need to talk about right now. So I made this and I was like, what other fandoms could I do this for? And then Pedro Pascal showed up to the SAG-AFTRA Awards looking like this. And everyone was like, oh my god, Mr. Darcy, we need another Pride and Prejudice adaptation. We need it stat and keep him in this outfit. What's also been going on for the past few days, which also has been on my mind for the past few days, is the general conversation about how we really don't need all these new adaptations. We don't need reboots. We don't need live action adaptations of animated work. And I was thinking about that, and I had a thought about this last night, and I was going to share it, and then I forgot to. But while I agree, there will always be one exception to this, and that is if the Muppets are involved. We don't really need another Pride and Prejudice. There's a million Pride and Prejudices, but we haven't seen a Pride and Prejudice with the Muppets, which we do need. No one really needed a new Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but if Mr. and Mrs. Smith with the Muppets, that would have been something to root for. And so I say all this to say... So I made this, and it took like an hour. But then I was thinking seriously about what a new Pride and Prejudice adaptation with the Muppets would look like, because here's the thing. While I love this, and while I'm very proud of myself, Miss Piggy would not be Lizzy. I'm sorry. She's too much of a diva. She would not be Lizzy. And I was thinking about the different roles that she could play because she's very multifaceted in this. So I was racking my brain. I was like, who could she play? Because she brings the drama. She brings the sass. Who in this role can be dramatic and sassy but still be married to Kermit, the mild-mannered Kermit? And I was like, oh my god. They are Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Kermit and Miss Piggy are Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Pedro Pascal still needs to be Mr. Darcy. I don't know who Sam Eagle would play in this production, but I do know that regardless, there needs to be a running gag where every time he looks into a mirror and sees his own reflection, it's just Oscar Isaac. So I started taking notes about some serious casting decisions on the Muppet involvement in this production. Lizzy would need to be the other human in this, and Darcy and Lizzy really only need to be the only humans in this production, which leaves Gonzo and Camilla to be our Bingley and Jane. And somehow, some way, Statler and Waldorf need to either combine forces to play Lady Catherine, or one needs to be the Lady Catherine role, the other needs to be Caroline. Either way, they need to join forces to bully Lizzy. And, I don't know if this is controversial to say, put Beaker in a wig, and that's Kitty. Nobody listens to Kitty anyways, and I think this would guarantee much more deserved attention on Kitty if it's Beaker. And that's where I'm at so far. Thank you for your time. I think a lot of Pride and Prejudice adaptations, retellings, etc. are really, really cowardly on 2 or 3 fronts. Number one being whether or not they decide to adapt all 5 of the Bennett sisters. Because, like, I get it, okay? Even Jane Austen forgot about Kitty, to be quite honest. There are so many adaptations that have just 3 Bennett sisters, that just have our Jane, our Lizzy, and our Lydia, and they don't even bother with Mary or Kitty. Most of the time, they just scrap Kitty. And I think that I think it's weak. I think it's really cowardly. I think to just not even bother because you can't think of a way to improve on anything. You can't think of a way to include them in the story without like overwhelming yourself. I think it's like kind of underwhelming. And I'm not saying like suddenly like rearrange things to make Kitty and Mary more involved, more central to the story, or have more of a focus. But at least like give me some effort that you're thinking of them, that you're also acknowledging them. The movie Fire Island has a really great way of going about this in developing all 5 of the sisters in this friend group, by simply casting actors that can maintain very big and memorable personalities. So even though the Mary and the Kitty characters have very limited screen time, they have these great background scenes, they have these great one-liners, they have these great like snippets that make them known to the audience. I think the other way that a lot of these adaptations really like need to develop some sort of like backbone is in the development or creation of their Wickham. I think a lot of these adaptations are relying too heavily on the audience already knowing that Wickham is going to be the bad guy, so they don't bother with doing the one thing that really makes him such a good like antagonist, or I guess villain, depending on what you want to call him. And that's in making him charming and likable in order for your audience to feel betrayed alongside Lizzy. I think a lot of these adaptations will just show you thinly veiled scum, or just like straight up scum that doesn't even bother hiding it because he's the Wickham character and you're not supposed to like him anyways. But I think that there's like a lot of creative strength and a lot of skill in being able to create a Wickham character that is likable, that results in the audience going, oh fuck, this guy's gonna do something terrible, oh no. I had a moment like this with Pride and Prejudice, the Bollywood-inspired movie musical, because that Wickham genuinely is like pretty charming. I remember when he was introduced, I was waiting for him to do something like that hints at being pretty scummy in his character introduction, and he didn't. And I was so upset because I knew that it was going to piss me off even more when it was revealed that he was like awful. And I think that that makes a great hateable character for your audience. I don't know where I'm going with this. But you know what I'm saying? Like I just wish that these characters got more development, more care in their handling. As ridiculous as the Mormon Pride and Prejudice is, I will always respect it for getting Kitty more involved in the storyline and also changing things up with Mary to make her more interesting and make what's going on with her more interesting. In like completely changing Mary's arc and also giving Kitty more of a role as like a ditzy but lovable sidekick to the deranged Lydia. I think the Mormon Pride and Prejudice did a lot with tapping into the potential humor in Kitty's character in being slightly older than Lydia, but still following her around like a puppy, and having Lydia hold dominance over Kitty for these like shenanigans. I'm not even gonna bother getting into my hatred for Lost in Austin giving Wickham a full redemption arc. Don't ask me about it. Like I'm getting to a point in my never-ending journey through Pride and Prejudice that whenever I see the 3 Bennett sisters, I get so annoyed. Like, I'm still gonna read it, obviously, but I get so annoyed. Let's talk about the Pride and Prejudice adaptation that I hated so much I couldn't even bring myself to finish it and don't know if I ever will. I want to apologize to the Hallmark Channel for everything I've said in the past about it being the worst. I will withhold that apology, but I will acknowledge that this is the worst. To say Pride and Protest by Nikki Payne grinds my gears is the understatement of the century. Of the millennium, if we're being honest. Pride and Protest by Nikki Payne is the story of a political activist and community organizer with a podcast falling in love reluctantly with an ethical billionaire gentrifier. Lisa is a Black woman and Darcy Fitzwilliam is a Filipino man, though he was adopted and raised by this rich white family. And here's the thing, part of the appeal of Pride and Prejudice is that both parties are going to be annoying and maybe even a little bit insufferable in some way at some point during the story. Lisa and Darcy piss me off as people separately and become even worse when they're together in a way that is not enjoyable in any way for me. They first meet when Lisa is going to crash a major event that Darcy's hosting as like the new CEO of this company because his brother and both of his parents died pretty recently in a car crash, leaving behind just him and his younger sister, who is also an adoptee. They meet outside of the event because he knows that this like protest is going to happen at some point with people who are sneaking in. He just doesn't know who until he finds her getting the signs ready and trying to like hide them somewhere in the event. And Lisa mistakes him for another community member, like someone who's going to join the protest, but also makes the really, it's not even cringe at this point, it is just like painfully uncomfortable and humiliating to even witness, makes the assumption that he is an impoverished Latino man who is struggling financially and must be so grateful to help feed his family with the literal pocket change she gives him. I wanted to DNF there, but I was like, no, this is a pretty popular book. I got multiple recommendations to read it. Like, we're gonna power through this. And then Darcy also makes some really racially insensitive comments and jokes about Lisa's natural hair being out, which she calls out as being racially insensitive and demands an apology for, but then she doesn't apologize for racially profiling him earlier, nor does she seem to correct or ever really have a problem with her friends and family members making Asian jokes about him, like calling him crazy rich Asian and stuff, and just like bringing up him being Asian in like these random occurrences. And it's very much that. It's very much this couple like microaggressing the fuck out of each other and just being really uncomfortable to witness. And then on top of that, this author really wants us to believe that there is or can be such a thing as an ethical billionaire. And right when I think that the book is gonna like address this like hypocrisy in some way, because like Darcy is set up to be someone who like cares, but not enough to stop what he's doing as a CEO of this company. There is a moment where Lisa asks him like, how can you be an ethical billionaire? And Darcy's like, how can anyone ethically consume anything in a capitalist society? Which radiated this vibe from the start. But then he proceeds to have this response to it, which was really condescending and strange. And then the conversation ends there. And I also say this in my review, like, I'm sure that it'll be revisited in some way later, but the fact that, like, this is where it stops is so blah. Then on top of that, with all of these, like, absolute nightmarish personalities from these two, these nightmarish conversations that they're having, they still cannot help but be so egregiously horny for each other all the time. Like, the amount of times that Darcy is quite literally fighting off a boner for this woman who, like, racially profiles him upon introduction and is very ignorant. They're both so ignorant and bigoted. It's strange. I'm also so confused on why I'm supposed to care about either of these two people, because Lisa reads as someone who's more concerned with being seen as an activist and actually being an activist, and instead of actually being an active, caring member of her community. And Darcy is he's so passive. He's so passive. He claims to care and just doesn't care enough to do anything. And maybe these character flaws are part of the overall conflict that they need to push through and overcome. But if this is where we're starting and you're giving me nothing to want to continue reading about, then what is the point of staying here? What about these characters that I've read for the first 34% of the entire book, because I got to the 34% mark, what about them should I be rooting for? I don't like either of them. I don't tolerate either of them. I would hate to be in a room with either of these characters and interact with them in any way. Characters don't need to be likable for me to want to read a book about them, but they do in a romance novel. But the vibe of this couple is the vibe of that one scene from Ginny and Georgia. I haven't even seen the show, but I've seen this clip so many times. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, both of these characters are so loud and out of touch and oblivious, but so confident about it at all times. And before anyone misconstrues anything, because it's the internet, that's what the internet does, I don't need characters to be perfect in a romance either. I prefer flawed characters, but you also need to make me want to see these people have a happy ending, and I would like for both of them to stay miserable where they are. So in order to avoid seeing them ever be happy, I quit. Though I hear that Sex, Lies, and Sensibility is much better and much more popular. I don't really know if I care to find out. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think I'd forgotten? I'd lost my way on this Pride and Prejudice journey? No, I took a detour, but I'm back. Let's discuss the 2023 Brazilian film Perdida, also known as La Sofia. Perdida is one of those movies where it's not really a Pride and Prejudice adaptation, it is more so Pride and Prejudice adjacent. Our main character is a young woman named Sophia who works in publishing and also is obsessed with Pride and Prejudice. We open up on her going into work attempting to pitch a new special edition publication of Pride and Prejudice that includes a bunch of letters from Jane Austen, notes, illustrations from that era. On the way, she gets asked out by a really nice guy from work, and she turns him down, and he seems pretty understanding at first until we see how he decides to punish her in that same meeting, where he and their boss sort of like tag team tearing down the idea entirely, and he goes on a whole rant about how the modern woman hates romance and just wants to sleep around. Sophia meets up with her best friend later for drinks and talks about how she lives in a world full of Wickhams. And then that same best friend, who is also her roommate, informs her that she's planning on moving to go live with her longtime boyfriend, and the two sort of have a falling out over it because Sophia is very jaded and doesn't believe that true love is attainable with modern men. This is where the story gets really weird, and Sophia becomes Lost Sophia. Sophia gets in a taxi with a mysterious woman who's very sociable, very personable, very fun to talk to, and also shares her love of Jane Austen. This taxi driver is Sophia's fairy godmother. And shortly after the encounter, she is transported to a world that is inspired by the Regency era, but isn't an actual real place. So it's a Jane Austen-inspired world that is also constructed for Sophia, which I honestly think is a pretty smart move to do instead of actually trying to transport her to the Regency era like we've seen with other works that are similar to this, Lost in Austen and An American in Austen. Because then we don't have to worry so much about the historical inaccuracies because it's not technically the real Regency era of England. It also makes it more believable when we watch characters surrounding her in this world become more modernized and heavily influenced by her presence. And there she meets a man named Ian Clark and also his younger sister in their estate. And here's the thing, I'm not mad at the romance between her and Ian. I think it's pretty sweet, honestly, and I think the actors have pretty solid chemistry. The issue with this movie is that it's just kind of boring. It's kind of cheesy, kind of corny, but also very earnest in a Hallmark movie kind of way. And I don't know how much of the budget went to the music, but I'm pretty sure whatever it was mainly went to them getting the rights to play Can't Help Falling in Love, because they play it multiple times. And I think their decisions on how they pause and interject it with certain moments between Sophia and Ian is very strange. The main conflict of this story, though, is whether or not Sophia will stay in this fictionalized version of 19th century England or return back to her modern life. And I'm sorry, I recognize that I need to suspend my disbelief for a lot of reasons, and it's just a movie. There is no man pretty enough or nice to me enough to make me have an internal debate at any point about whether or not my love for him trumps my love for the right to vote, modern medicine, and hot chips. And also my family. But do you know what I mean? Ultimately, I give the experience overall 2.5 out of 5 stars because it took me 3 or 4 days to actually finish the movie once I started. It's not a long movie, and I wasn't that busy. I was I just kept losing interest. Sophia and Ian are very cute, though, I will not lie. After months of being on the wait list with my library, I finally read and finished Most Ardently and loved it. I think it's gonna stay in my top 5 Pride and Prejudice adaptations. Most Ardently, for anyone who doesn't know, is a queer Pride and Prejudice adaptation where our main character is Oliver Bennett, a young gay trans man, and Mr. Darcy is a closeted gay man. I inhaled this book. This adaptation leans very heavily into the romance aspect between Oliver and Darcy. So it feels most suited for people whose favorite Pride and Prejudice is Pride and Prejudice 2005. Because the book and the romance are very saccharine sweet, very cavity-inducing in nature. I also just really love Oliver as a character, but also as a narrator. He has this really fiery spirit in demanding and insisting on respect for his identity, and the relationship and the romance and the chemistry between him and Darcy was absolutely perfect. Now, because we shift focus to a lot of other elements in the story, we do unfortunately see a cut and entire removal or reduction of any sort of storylines or connections made with the other Bennett siblings, which I do think is pretty unfortunate. At some point, Mary, Lydia, and Kitty sort of disappear. And I don't love the handling of Mr. Wickham and Mr. Collins in this adaptation. I've spoken before how it's kind of a pet peeve for adaptations to not even bother making Wickham charming or likable or interesting at the very beginning, and to just let the audience hate him from the jump alongside whoever our Lizzy is. And we have that here. We have Oliver registering Wickham as a dick from the jump. But with that route I used to, what really threw me off was Collins. Typically, Mr. Collins' biggest crime in the story is that he's really embarrassing. This version of him, he has a tendency to lean more towards being antagonistic and also malicious in nature. And I don't know, I love going into a new Pride and Prejudice adaptation to see how Collins is handled, because usually he's just funny, but he wasn't really funny or enjoyable in this version of him. I think this version of the Wickham conflict, though, is very interesting and sets up for a very cheesy but very precious to me happily ever after, which has to be one of the highlights of this book. There are some tender moments scattered all throughout the experience of it, especially with any interaction Oliver has with Jane and his father. And I really can't bring myself to take issue with the very cheesy nature of the ending, because I think more queer youth deserve endings like this. Most Ardently just manages to be so fast-paced and so engaging while still remaining earnest. And this version of the Bennett family truly has my heart. So I listened to Gay Pride and Prejudice, the modern adaptation Spotify original from 2022 that takes place in 2015 and opens up on gay marriage becoming legal in the US. And despite me not really loving it as a story on its own, it is a pretty strong adaptation of the work. I have a lot of thoughts, but I will be getting into spoilers. Our main character is Bennett, and he has a group of 4 best friends: Charlotte, Luke, Mary, and James. There is no Kitty character in this adaptation, which is one of my biggest pet peeves. But whatever, there's no Kitty. And it's a group of 30-something-year-olds who met and became best friends back when they were in college. Also in college is when they got attached to one of their professors, Mrs. B, who is our Mrs. Bennett, played by Rosie O'Donnell. Mrs. B had a wife who was her life partner, but just not recognized as her wife legally, named Miss Longbourn, who dies before the story begins. The opening scene is everyone at Miss Longbourn's funeral when notifications start going off that gay marriage has just been legalized. So they all go to celebrate, though Bennett feels weird going out to a club partying with Mrs. B when Mrs. B is really fragile during this time, having just given the funeral for her wife that day. But Mrs. B says that her wife would have wanted her to celebrate this. It is at this party that we meet Carlos Bingley, who is a former 90s pop star, his sister Carolina, and his best friend Darcy Williams, who is a former NFL player who made history by being openly gay while also in the NFL. And the story progresses from there. Honestly, I really enjoy the overall format of this story. What made this difficult to get through, though, is that I think 90% of the personalities of these characters are really grating and obnoxious and annoying. Especially Charlotte. Charlotte is the token straight girl in this entire story and radiates the energy of a straight girl who's really obsessed with having gay best friends, but really just gay men best friends. And she has some offhand comments that are very weird and fetishizy about gay men. She says, she asks out loud why gay men make her horny. And I found her very annoying. I dreaded having to hear Charlotte speak. Now, while I think a lot of the writing of this format of this production is really clever and really smart, it does have some moments where I have to question what the writers were thinking, because it's overall a pretty lighthearted and humorous approach to the story, but then it has these moments that are extremely heavy that have to do with addiction and overdose, and one of the characters dies in the story, and it's really devastating. But because the format is only 20-minute episodes in, I think it's an 8-episode podcast format, we have to recover from those heavy moments extremely quickly without a proper transition, which makes references and discussions centering the Pulse nightclub shooting especially jarring, because it's mentioned in all of its seriousness for about a minute before we immediately jump to relationship drama. And what I personally don't appreciate about the inclusion of the Pulse nightclub shooting as a plot point, it's not really a plot point, it's just sort of mentioning it functions as a vehicle for James and Carlos to reconnect, the mention of this very real tragedy is only used in order to bring characters together and resolve a conflict for their relationship. And then we move on and it's happily ever after, which it felt very insensitive. I think using a mass shooting regardless would have been really insensitive for this purpose, but using a real life mass shooting was odd. I understand this is grounded in a lot of realism and politics are going to be brought up every once in a while, but this is one of those things I think should have and could have been edited. Now, I did really like the handling of Luke, who is our Lydia, and of Mary. Luke's main function is comedic relief for like a good 80% of the story, and he's super bubbly and high energy and memorable. But when it comes to the Wickham conflict, he becomes very three-dimensional and very vulnerable and very sympathetic. And he's able to have these really important conversations while also driving the story forward. And with Mary, I just love Mary. And I really enjoy the direction that they took with her and Carolina. I think it was really cute and really well done. But a lot of this story is just Bennett getting into arguments with people, and either Bennett not listening to what other people have to say, or other people not listening to what Bennett has to say. And what this unfortunately does for me is it weakens the believability of like any sort of meaningful connection between a lot of these friends within this one friend group. Like a lot of these friendships feel very surface level. Quite a few of the personalities feel really surface level, especially with Bennett of all characters, which was strange because he's the one we get the most time with. More often than not, his characterization is really hollow, and I think that's weird. I think it's really weird to breathe more life into side characters we barely see than in the main character we're with always. This isn't a character where we should be getting glimpses of warmth from. All in all, though, I would like to see more classics be adapted in this format. It's short, it's sweet, and it covers a lot of ground. And I really enjoyed and appreciated how far they were able to take it in production in order to further insert us into the story with the sound effects and the music and the background noises. I think as a story on its own, I give it 2.5 out of 5. But as an adaptation, I give it like a 3.5, maybe a 3.75 out of 5. It's solid. I don't have any interest in re-listening to it. I think it's time we get a new Pride and Prejudice movie. And I'm not talking about like a modern Pride and Prejudice movie, Pride and Prejudice as robots. I actually would like Pride and Prejudice as robots. I don't want a Pride and Prejudice inspired thing. I want Pride and Prejudice. I want Pride and Prejudice within that time period, within the Regency era. Here's the thing. I'll really only accept it one of two ways. Though, with the robots thing, maybe one of three ways. First way being robots. I said it as a joke, and I want Pride and Prejudice as robots. Regency era, but colorblind casting. Am I partially doing this because I would love to see Dev Patel or Oscar Isaac or Pedro Pascal in the flowy blouse shirt? Yes, absolutely, and I refuse to apologize for that. But the other way, the way that I think more people need this, Muppets. And this isn't the first time I've said it, but I'm so serious. I'm so serious. Bring in the Muppets! The people yearn to see Kermit the Frog back in a top hat. So it truly makes Pride and Platypus one of a kind beyond the concept of taking Pride and Prejudice as it is, but applying the world-building element of every man in this world being cursed at birth with the affliction or the ordeal, which causes them to turn into a very specific animal when there's a full moon. I put it mentally in the same category as Pride and Prejudice, but if Mr. Darcy were a vape god. But like I'm saying, that's not even what makes this in a league of its own. That concept alone. It's not even the illustrations the author did scattered throughout the novel. What truly makes this is the entirely unrelated, separate storyline happening in the footnotes of this book. There are a little over 100 footnotes, and in these footnotes, there are 3 major characters interacting with each other. There's the main editor who feels the need to explain things that are overtly obvious that no one could have ever gotten confused in a million years. Then there's editor number 2 who hates editor number 1 and will get into arguments with them about how useless these footnotes are. Then we get to a halfway point where a third mystery editor starts like shit-talking random parts of the book, and editors 1 and 2 sort of like put down their grievances and be like, who is this? And absolutely none of it is actually relevant to the plot of Pride and Prejudice or Pride and Platypus. And it's probably my new favorite thing I've ever read in a book. Oh, hello there. Would you like to hear about the modern gay Pride and Prejudice musical I just attended? I have 2 pages of notes that I'm actually very impressed by because I was squinting in the dark trying to write them all down. Pride, Prejudice, and Promposals. The added layer of something that made me very intrigued by this musical is that it's also a jukebox musical set to only Taylor Swift music. But before I get into all my thoughts, I need to show you the buttons that I bought as merch for this musical. All Pride, No Prejudice, which I got from my friend who is a super huge Swiftie. These 2 are for me that I'm really, really excited about. It's Lizzy and also Mr. Darcy. I'm obsessed with these buttons. I don't know where I'm going to put them, but they will be on display. And now on to my thoughts about this musical, this 75-minute musical production. The story takes place at Pemberley High School, which is a private Christian school, and it's run by Principal Bingley, who is a very intense, God-fearing woman. Our leading Bennett siblings are Betty, who is the Lizzy character, Jay, who is the Jane character, and Lydia. Unfortunately, there is no Mary or Kitty character, which is usually a pet peeve of mine, but with how jam-packed and fast-paced this production was, I understood why they just did not have the time for those 2. This entire production is building up to, is in anticipation of their school prom. And one of the opening scenes, I think the opening scene, involves Principal Bingley stating that no same-sex or same-gendered couples are allowed to attend prom as each other's dates. Enter Jay, our Jane character, who is very loudly and proudly gay. Jay is such an interesting character because the thing is, in every sort of like iteration of Jane, she's very traditionally very shy, very introverted, very difficult to read, but that mainly builds up to one of the major conflicts with her and Bingley being that there's a misunderstanding from Darcy's perspective about whether or not Jane is even into Bingley. That misunderstanding is cut out entirely in place of a different misunderstanding having to do with homophobia and all that stuff. When we take away the conflict surrounding Jane hiding her feelings, it no longer becomes relevant. And so instead we have this really loud, witty, big personality come from the Jane character within Jay. Jay also gets like equal amount of stage time as Betty. So it doesn't even feel like Betty is the main character. It feels like her and Jay are the main characters. There's no Charlotte character, but there's also nothing that has to do with Charlotte and Collins. Collins is such an experience in this show. He is in love with Jesus. And what I really, really enjoyed about this show are certain pairings that had to do with Collins, because Collins during this whole show is sort of part of a villain duo with Caroline, only they're both nosy and getting in people's business for drastically different reasons. Collins is in everybody's business to preach the word of the Lord and also because he's in love with Betty. Caroline is in everyone's business because she's a very traditional, stereotypical mean girl who is trying to jump Darcy's bones. But their dynamic is just so undeniably funny. And the physical comedy of the actor playing Collins is like so, even when Collins was just like in the background and other people were talking, I couldn't help but look at what Collins was doing. Caroline also just has some really funny standout moments. There's a whole like dress up school dance where the theme was love stories. Caroline shows up as sexy Jesus. The show also decided to make Darcy and Wickham brothers. They're brothers from England who have recently moved to the US and are brand new students to this whole school. But people are already familiar with Wickham because he's a big TikTok star and he's always shirtless. He is always shirtless. I think the characterization of Wickham is fine. It's not my favorite. It falls into that pet peeve of mine where he's never charming and he's douchey right off the bat, so we don't really have a chance to fall in love with him and also feel that betrayal. But with him being douchey from the start and everyone hating him on instinct just because his personality is awful, it does build up really strongly and really successfully into when him and Lydia have their moment and she performs Trouble. Because anyone with eyes and bare minimum sense knew that Wickham was trouble when he walked in. Darcy is also really, really funny and just so awkward and earnest and trying his best but failing because he can't help but be blunt. Just like so much throughout this entire show in a way that I loved so much. Lydia starts out very ditzy and very surface level, but what I really enjoy is that her version of the Wickham conflict sort of gives growth and maturity to Lydia, who then has this whole side arc of reclaiming her inner strength and learning to forgive herself and accept herself and love herself in a way that it was so surprising and so beautiful at the same time. The show was also so fun. I'm not really a Swiftie. Like, there are some Taylor Swift songs I like, but I definitely felt a little bit left out when it came to audience participation because the audience was encouraged to sing along. So I felt left out at that part. But there were some inclusions of Taylor Swift songs that I felt that they were just so strong narratively. My top 3 song performances in the entire production are Enchanted, which in context is Jay and our Charlie Bingley meeting and sort of them singing about their experiences about each other, and then it sort of like transitions into this really cute montage of sorts of them sort of beginning to date. Next is a sort of mashup of Story of Us and Mean, which is the big confrontation between Betty and Darcy, which I thought was just really, really clever. And last was You Need to Calm Down, which in context was insane. Darcy realizes that his actions were homophobic in trying to protect Charlie from being openly with Jay because Charlie is still closeted. And this act of attempting to protect his friend from facing any sort of bigotry was, in fact, very bigoted in and of itself. So then he does an epic performance with Jay on stage and interrupts like a pep rally with rainbow flag superhero capes and performs You Need to Calm Down at the principal. And this, I wrote down, Mr. Darcy, talk Valentina. Also in that performance, Darcy kisses Collins in a way that reminds me so much of Michael Scott kissing Oscar to show that he's not homophobic. But then what that does is that you have a moment with Collins off to the side where he's having some realizations about some things. And at the end, at prom, Collins shows up in a rainbow suit with Wickham as his date, which transforms Wickham into being an evil chaos bisexual ? The show had some surprisingly really tender emotional moments, especially having to do with Bingley and his mom and the overarching message of the entire show being love is love. It was sweet. It was so undeniably sweet, and I had so much fun. I got to speak to the director/writer of the whole production afterwards, also because a follower of mine was there, and then her sister was Betty, and then I talked to Betty, and then she was like, you should talk to the director. He is so nice! And he's also just so, I think he's brilliant. I'm so annoyed that none of his videos showed up on my For You page at all, because I just spent the last, half hour getting caught up on his one-man show of the 1995 BBC production of Pride and Prejudice. And it is absolutely brilliant. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with where this entire thing is going. Never mind the perfect lip syncing and the physicality of it all. The spirit of Mrs. Bennett quite literally possesses this man in a way that I didn't think was possible. But also there are numerous costumes that are created by simply taking a t-shirt and safety pins and altering the neckline. Every time Lizzy breaks the fourth wall just to stare directly to the camera, I laugh uncontrollably because it's so wonderfully done. But you want to know my favorite part about this entire series of his? Every single character gets their own distinct costume, except for Kitty and Lydia. Kitty and Lydia have the same costume, and the way that they navigate their interactions with each other, it looks like they are both possessing one singular body. And it's so Kitty and Lydia. That is so Kitty and Lydia. Bravo. This is officially in the Hall of Fame for Pride and Prejudice adaptations. Thank you. There was an unofficial sequel to Pride and Prejudice called Pride and Prejudice 2. It's a little over 200 pages. I read it in a few hours. I need everyone to know that this exists. If I am left alone with any of this information, I will die. Pride and Prejudice 2 takes place 6 months after Lizzy and Darcy get married. They have a simple, happy, peaceful life together in their home. There are no conflicts in their relationship. However, Jane and Bingley gifted the newlyweds a set of matching notebooks. Fancy notebooks. Lizzy has dreams of being a writer. She would love to be published one day. So she decides that this notebook would be the perfect place to put her new story. However, she keeps getting distracted with thoughts of Mr. Darcy, her husband. And very quickly, the story she writes is about a woman named Lizzy and her husband, Mr. Darcy, getting freaky at all times, anywhere, everywhere, everything. Unbeknownst to Lizzy, the notebooks are magically linked. When you write in one, the words appear in the other notebook. Mr. Darcy's notebook is also being filled with this story of the two of them, and he has been reading it in secret in his notebook this entire time. He realizes that these must be fantasies and desires that his wife simply cannot muster the strength or courage to voice out loud to him. He decides to follow through and treat this as an instruction manual. These two are getting freaky 24/7 everywhere. There are 65 mentions of Mr. Darcy's cravat in this book. He is always readjusting his cravat. There is always a new mention of the masculine shade of eggshell white of his cravat. His cravat gets used for these extracurricular activities in various ways. The cravat is used a bit too much to represent Darcy's state of mind, the state of his self-control. It is perfectly in place when he feels well-mannered, but when he is a man undone, so is the cravat. 65 mentions, and this man gets bold. There are some lines spoken in this book I will never be able to process, but will also never forget. There's mention of like a newsletter article situation that Lizzy keeps track of for book recommendations called Book Talk. There was also a section where Darcy is talking to Bingley about these magical notebooks and the nature of Lizzy's writing. And Bingley's like, oh, like fan fiction? And now Darcy knows what fan fiction is. That's not even the craziest part, literally, about any of this. The craziest part is the chapter dedicated to Jane and Bingley. You get a Jane and Bingley freaky chapter. Jane and Bingley have taken up being thieves for fun. They rob houses for funsies. It began as a joke because no one would suspect them, because why would you? It's Jane and Bingley. Then they sort of get addicted to it, and then they decide to set some ground rules. There are only 2 rules. Number 1, they will not hurt anyone. Number 2, they will only steal from the people who deserve to be robbed. Which brings us to their chapter. They're breaking into some guy's house in Northanger Abbey. There is a mysterious painting of a housekeeper on the wall, who then appears mid-robbery, mid-freaky section between Jane and Bingley, and she is invited to be the third. The woman disappears shortly after the trio's activities. She was a ghost, ? It is also very important to note that after this interaction happens, Jane says North Banger Abbey. I think Jane truly shines in Pride and Prejudice too. There are more mentions of like supernatural things that go on. There are more supernatural tools used in some of the interactions between Lizzy and Darcy. The two are like rabbits. Random references to boiled potatoes and the pianoforte. This is such a deeply unserious book. I couldn't stop laughing. This is one of my favorite things ever. I think it's one of the greatest examples of just how much fun free will can be. Do I recommend it? Not in public, but yes. Actually, yeah. Months ago, I made a video about a then upcoming release called Puck and Prejudice, and many people lost their minds calling it the death of literature, the death of media literacy even. Hundreds of people told me Jane Austen was spinning in her grave, like they knew her personally, like Jane Austen wasn't well documented and having a sense of humor. Like this was the worst Jane Austen adjacent anything to ever come out. Anyways, the book has been released and I read it. It's not nearly as interesting or nearly like even Pride and Prejudice related enough to justify this level of vitriol, of disgust and horror. Not even interesting enough to kill literature. Oh my god. This is Jane Austen related if you squint. I'm actually kind of annoyed that it's not more Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice heavy. This is the plot. Main guy, Tucker, Tuck has an incident, accidentally time travels. He wakes up in the Regency era and is found by a woman named Lizzy. Lizzy Woodash. I still don't know how it's pronounced. A woman who is besties with Jane Austen, also an aspiring writer, hates men. Well, not hates men. Hates the idea of, like, having to get married. It's kind of her dream to be a widow. She doesn't like the idea of, like, mourning someone you love, but she really wants to, like, marry a dying guy so that she can just not have to be married for long and then not have the expectation of being remarried. She understands that this is unrealistic and also not very classy of her to request, until she meets Tuck, an American from the future. Enter a marriage of convenience where they're married while Tuck is trying to figure out how to time travel back to the present. The two can lay the groundwork that they're in a legitimate marriage so that once the day finally comes that he disappears, she can be a widow, the widow of her dreams. But this is a romance novel. They fall in love. It complicates things. And here's the thing. I will say I did really appreciate the very sweet nature of this book. I feel like it's weirdly hard to come by these days with newer releases of rom-coms for the work to be genuinely very sweet. It feels like it's trying too hard to be funny more often than not, which is also my beef with, like, rom-com film especially, but that's not the topic at hand. But no, Tuck and Lizzy, adorable together. I really enjoyed seeing them interact. I think they have a great relationship. And here's the thing, we do meet Jane Austen, but we get her at the very, very beginning when she helps come up with the plan for them to enter that marriage of convenience so that she can be a widow after he goes back to the present. And we see her again at the very, very end. We also get some pieces, some slivers of Pride and Prejudice, because when we meet Jane Austen in this timeline, she is currently writing Pride and Prejudice. Tuck even accidentally inspires a really famous scene with Mr. Collins because he's so embarrassing and awkward at a dinner table. But that's it. She's barely in it. I don't even think she takes up 1% of the story. The main focus is really just Lizzy, because here's where the book falls flat. We have two main characters. This is dual POV. This isn't a case of one main character and their love interest. These are two main characters. So why is Lizzy the only one with a character arc? Why is Lizzy the only one with character development? Tuck doesn't change at all from beginning to end. He's a stand-up guy. He's very kind. He's very motivational. He doesn't change. He begins the story as, like, the perfect man for Lizzy, and he ends the story as the perfect man for Lizzy. Lizzy, on the other hand, goes from a total doormat to suddenly advocating for herself, standing up for herself, finding her voice, feeling seen for the first time in her life. Granted, we don't really see her before she meets Tuck, so the change isn't that significant on page, but we know a significant change has happened because it's emphasized so much. Tuck's storyline is that he's falling in love with Lizzy, which doesn't feel like much when it's a romance novel, and I would hope that happens. That's it. He doesn't develop further than what we meet at the very beginning, which, like, thank God, because he's a chill guy. Then the other thing that really bothers me is hyping up what high stakes we have in this story and then not delivering. And minor spoilers, but I'll try to be as vague as possible about it. Tuck and Lizzy both really love each other. They care for each other deeply. This is the greatest love either of them have ever known. Tuck, however, has his life in the modern day. He has a family he needs to go back to. He has a career. He also is in remission from undergoing cancer treatment. He's at risk of the cancer returning and being stuck with old medicine that he knows will not help him. He has a million reasons to go back to his original timeline. Same with Lizzy. Lizzy has a million reasons why she wants to stay in her original timeline. She also has a family. She also has people she would hate to mourn for her. There's too much unknown about what the future would give her. So we have two really strong, really compelling reasons why they need to stay where they originally were. Sound reasons why they shouldn't end up together, but we know that they will. Big question the whole time is, how are they going to make it work? Who's going to make the sacrifice? There is no sacrifice, and that's so disappointing. The ending feels like a cop-out. Now, does it have some undeniably funny moments sprinkled throughout? Yes, absolutely. And I really enjoyed how these personalities bounce off of each other. But really, this is just a historical romance with a time travel element. Not the first of its kind by any means. It just throws in this minor connection to Jane Austen, and suddenly everyone was up in arms. Pitchforks ready. Relax.